Yes, isn't it lovely to be here with all of you? I'm Jamila Aisha Brown. I'm a communications consultant. I work with nonprofit organizations throughout the African diaspora. My family is from Panama by way of Jamaica, Barbados, and Guyana. I carry a lot of flags at the Caribbean Parade. It is a joy to be here with all of you and talk about not only colorism, but Afro-Latinidad and all of the diversity that Latin America encompasses that we often miss and don't represent accurately. So I will pass it to Aura to introduce herself.
Cool. Good morning, everyone. I hope everybody's having a wonderful and uplifted Saturday. Buenos días a todos y a todas. Mi nombre es Aura Vasquez. I'm Aura Vasquez. I'm an Afro-Latina from Colombia. And I'm from Cali, which is the southwest of Colombia, for those who know. I'm a big salsera. We're like the salsa capital of the world. I have been an environmental justice advocate since I was a child, first in my native Colombia, when we suffer from the struggles of agriculture and the legacy of colonialism, for that matter. I moved to New York City when I was 18 years old. I worked for a Congress member there, and I was an undocumented immigrant for many years. And later, I came to the West Coast to Los Angeles and continue my work with social justice and environmental issues. Became a community organizer and helped LA get off of coal. Later, became the first immigrant and the youngest board member commissioner for Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, which is the largest utility in the country. And there I pushed Los Angeles to get to 100% renewable energy, which has been very exciting with very strong equity lens. I really excited to see what's coming for us, and I continue my work on environmental issues from park access to getting off of fossil fuels, from plastic pollution, from access to the outdoors for people that look like us. I'm so excited to be here in 2020. I ran for city council here in Los Angeles as the first Afro Latina to ever run for office in California. So there's a lot more work that we need to do here. But I'm very excited to be, one of these pioneers that is opening doors for more people like us. And I'm excited to have a conversation about how it's like for us Afro Latinos that maybe are not very dark skinned, and how colorism plays a huge role in politics, and how my experience there really shaped, or the way I look really shaped my experience as a candidate for office here in California. So thank you so much. I'm surrounded with some incredible women, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you so much.
Why don't we have Rosa introduce herself next?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be part of this event. Rosa Clemente, Black Puerto Rican, born in the South Bronx, in the founding of hip hop. So I'm an organizer, producer, independent journalist, and in 2008, I was the first and the only to this day Afro-Latina woman to run for vice president of the United States with Cynthia McKinney and the Green Party ticket. So thank you for having me.
Amazing. Thank you, Rosa. Let's have Alejandrina to speak next.
Hi, everybody. My name is Alejandrina Guzman. My pronouns are she and her. And my audio description is I'm really close to the camera. I have light brown skin, black hair, and a pink blouse on. I'm really excited to be in the space with all of you and those joining us. My introduction is I am Asiana, Mexican American, living here in Texas. My parents are from Mexico, and I'm also physically disabled. And I think that shaped a lot of how I have lived my life and how it's led to activism and what we're going to talk about today. But most of the things that I do is community organizing. Most of it being with disabled siblings, not just here in Texas, but across the nation. And most recently, in the 2020 election, I was the constituency organizer for the disability community here in Texas, which was a big deal because, at least for the Dem Party, that has never been a thing before. They've never, which is a whole thing also, but that's never been a thing to have an actual organizer dedicated to reaching out to disabled Texans. And I think Texas and Iowa were the first two to have these roles solidified. So all to say, I've learned a lot, not just in policy and politics, but also, being in community and building that mutual aid between all of our siblings and, of course, identity. So thank you so much for listening.
And Yvette, last but not
giving thanks to those whose shoulders we stand on first and foremost, giving thanks to the guiding spirits of the ancestors, that today be filled with truth and light, dando gracias. I want to dedicate my time today to my Panamanian community, especially my Tolonenses, as today we're celebrating our Independence Day in the streets of Brooklyn. Mi nombre es Yvette Modestin, La Polata Dukia Pukisi, Empress Modestai, the many names that I carry. First and foremost, just excited to be here on a panel with Doctora Rosa Clemente, talking about someone who's been out in these streets doing this work. Just hats off, deeply proud to be here moderated with our moderator, who is family to me. So I don't call her Jamila, I call her Aisha. So deeply proud of you. So I look forward to the conversation. I wear many hats, but first and foremost, I'm a Black Panamanian and I'm unapologetically Black en español y en inglés.
Amazing. So as you can tell, we have a very powerful and incredible panel. I am humbled to be your guide through this process. And I want to kick us off with a question that is a big question, but essentially, how did you get here? What experiences in your life brought you to do this work, really to be so proudly and boldly Black, Latin, describing the work that you do from many different walks of life, from the streets to government and institutions. I'll start with Aura. You talked about this a little bit with your experiences in Cali, of course, but what keeps you engaged and inspired, and what lit you up to do that work?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I just want to I feel like I'm in this space with these incredible women, so I can be very candid about about my experience. So growing up in Colombia, I was never different. I had my family is from all shades, from very dark skinned Black, palenque looking, to red hair, light skin, flecos. So I grew up in a space, and Cali being the second largest city in Latin America with the most Afro descendants, in Latin America. So I never, my parents call me negrita. I grew up, just, to me was never a difference until I came to this country, where people started boxing me in different places. Are you Latina, or are you not? Are you Afro-Latina? Or are you, what are you? And it became pretty prominent later for me that my identity was also tied in this country to a whole other history that I didn't really had to deal with in my own country. You know, in my country I was just one more negrita. I was just one more, you know, lighter skinned Black woman, you know, and I had the courage and the personality and the being strong and that and that legacy of matriarchs that are like that have like lifted up our culture and our communities, you know, especially, you know, women being the heads of households and such. So I mentioned this because I was never different, you know, back home, and growing up, a big piece of me becoming involved in community and becoming involved in politics was my parents. And my parents, since I was little, very small, they would used to take me to the community meetings and the things that they will organize and such. And they would say, "Di algo, habla. What do you think we're doing? Like, you know, express yourself." And that really taught me a big lesson about like my voice matter, and I'm here because I belong here, which is a huge part for us also as women of the, you know, African diaspora and African descent. So I wanted to share this little story, and I'm curious about everyone else, but this is what really brought me here. The fact that I had a family that, you know, were humble and were, you know, maybe not very educated scholarly, but they were like deeply invested in giving me a voice and allowing me to rise and to lead. And that was very notorious since I was you know, since I was a little girl. And you know, and also lifting up the differences that we have to, some of us as immigrants have to kind of deal with when we come here, and because of the way, you know, the way that we look. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm wondering, Alejandrina, do you have an experience or anything that really kind of brought you into doing this work, especially in Texas? I can imagine.
Yes. This is Alejandrina speaking. Yeah. Okay. So first, I was born in Fort Worth. Grew up in a small. It used to be a small town. Now it's like a small suburb in Azle, Texas. And growing up, all that it was for me was, you know, at home speaking Spanish. You know, in the culture, you know, going to church, like all these things. But in school, since my town is like mostly white, I never really saw that in school. It was very, my identity at the front was being disabled, and I was just, you know, focused on that. And in my senior year of high school, I didn't know that I could do this, but I ended up applying to colleges, and I applied to UT Austin, which at the time was a big deal for me because, again, how am I going to move away from freaking Azle, Texas to Austin? Like, there's no way. You know, my mom would help me out. So, on top of that, I'm the oldest. I'm a woman. I'm in a wheelchair. My parents are from Mexico. Like, they didn't want me to go. They didn't want me to leave. And it was really hard because my mom at the time would get really angry when I would talk about possibly moving to Austin to go to UT. All to say, she came around to the idea. I got in and I moved. And honestly, it's really wild looking back because until I was at UT is when I start, like, all my experiences, like who I am, like started hitting me in the face. Oh wow, I can like move around on my own because there's public transportation in Austin. In Azle, there's there's none of that, right? I was like, wow, like I can be independent in a way. Like, what is this? Like a whole new world opened up for me. And it wasn't until I got involved in some organizations in college, and one of them being student government, which is a whole thing. I used to be super angry about student government and how like students just want to do this to like pad their resume, like, you know, they suck. And like, I was super like very antagonistic towards the organization. Actually, one of my friends convinced me to run as a representative my second year at UT. And once I got in, I won as a rep. I got in into the org, and that's when me being a brown woman hit me. Like racism hit me, and I mean, y'all, I was like what 19, 20, I don't even know. Imagine someone just going through life and like not really realizing race ever. And then all of a sudden it hits me. And it's like, how do you, like, I would cry like after some of these student government meetings, and I would cry going home because I'd be like, I don't know how to freaking deal with this. Like, I would call my friends who are Latina, Mexican American Mexicans, and I'd be like, it is so like what? Like, I had to ask, like, how do you navigate this? Like, I've never had to navigate that, and it's been a whole thing. But all to say that like all the culmination of the different things that I did on campus led to me understanding politics, understanding identity, understanding that everyone has their own experiences, and that's, you know, to in a way, as much as one is able to embrace that, because as we know, with systemic uh, racism, systemic ableism, systemic all the isms, right? Like, yeah, sometimes you don't want to embrace that, or sometimes you don't want to go out and protest, and sometimes you can't even like think about what's going on. Like, yes, that is because of these systems going on. And I didn't realize that until after college. Like, oh, it's okay to like sometimes check out. Like, it's been rough sometimes, as I'm sure we all know here. But that my trajectory of like understanding, you know, in my point of view with disability, you know, at the forefront of everything that I've gone through, has led me to just work on you know, community organizing, and like how these powers, systems and powers, yeah, yes, it's a thing. And we have the community that we can like all rely on and build upon together. And like right now, fast forward, I'm at that point where it's like I'm burnt out. I should not be. I'm burnt out, and I'm very, very disenchanted. But I still remember that community is there, mutual aid is there. We have each other, and as much as we're able to, we're gonna be okay. So that's how I got to where I am now.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really beautiful. Reminds me of Gwendolyn Brooks, who talks about how we are each other's harvest, we are each other's bond. So we really do need each other. And I think it's really important for us to have these spaces in particular for us to connect and to give each other that energy when we're feeling burnt out. It's definitely something I know I have gone through many a times through my activist life. So I want to encourage you to give yourself that space. And I also, based on our first two speakers, want to just uplift some themes. You know, the theme of intersectionality. So also bringing another scholar, Kimberly Crenshaw, into the space, and just acknowledging that depending on what environment you're in, people will pick some identities for you and thrust them upon you. So, you know, that having to deal with being disabled first, right? and then coming into consciousness around, race, ethnicity, complexion, etc. Having to, being in an environment where you were one of the majority. So it wasn't an anomaly or different that you were, an Afro-Colombian person, but then being thrust into the United States and being like, well, explain yourself. What are you? Which one do you, choose? Which one do you identify? And I think definitely for a lot of us, that has been something in our lives where I think what oppression does is it chooses us, it forces us to choose when there is no choice. We are all of these things all at once. So I want to thank you both for sharing that. And I'm very excited to hear from Rosa about your experience because I'm so familiar with your work and everything, but I don't think I've ever known kind of what was like the thing that got you to be Doctora Clemente and all of the amazing things you're doing.
Yeah, so it's interesting because hearing Alejandra, it's like I have a very similar experience, but I was born in the Bronx, like when I was born there, the Bronx was literally burning because insurance and landlords were burning down the buildings. Also there was a high level of poverty in New York City at that time was actually bankrupt, so I grew up like around rubble and playing, outside and, it was just how I grew up. And I didn't really know anything different until my mom moved us to Westchester County. And the thing is, Bronx County and Westchester County are only 21 miles apart. Westchester County is the suburbs of New York City. That's literally how Robert Moses destroyed the Bronx by building the Cross Bronx Expressway so that white folks living in or working in Midtown Manhattan in those years could surpass going through the Bronx. So when my mom moved us, I moved into this small little town called Elmsford, New York. It's not even a town, it's a village. And we were the only Latinos there at the time, but, or we would have said Puerto Ricans, but the community was very, and to this day, it's like a utopia in a weird way because it was us, but everyone else was white or African American. And African American people there were very affluent, right? So it was like the Black side of town was better in terms of affluency. I went to a school where there were 37 people in my class, it was very utopic. I was a cheerleader, student government, Key Club, Rotary Club. But then on the weekends, my mom always took us back to the Bronx. So the older I got, I began to realize oh shit, my primas and primos are not going to have the same accessibility to higher education. And my dad has his bodega and he's had it to this day. He's in the Bronx right now, And so it was just weird. And then as beautiful as my life was on the outside, it wasn't like that on the inside all the time. But when I went to college, where I'm at now, Albany, New York, I went to the State University of New York. The first couple of years were rough, but then I accidentally got put in a Black family class, and in there was Dr. Vivian Verdell Gordon. And Dr. Gordon was the first Black woman to get her PhD from UVA. And if anybody understands the University of Virginia and the complete white supremacist nature, and then she took me to a conference in Boston for National Black Social Workers. And I was getting all this information and at the same time going home really angry at my family and my parents. I'd be like, yo, Dad, I didn't know we were a colony. Why are we American citizens? I thought being Puerto Rican was a race. Why didn't you tell me about Albizu Campos? I was angry. And I didn't go home for years. I just stayed at SUNY Albany. And as I grew as a person and racially conscious, the reason I got that way was because I went to the Latino organization meeting. Mind you, this is in 1991, right? And they just spoke Spanish. Now, I was bilingual till I was 8, so Spanish is my first language. And I was in that room like, this isn't fair, because I have cousins who don't speak Spanish. That is not the arbitrator of what makes you, quote, at that time, Hispanic. And I bounced. And then I went to the Black Student Union meeting, and I was so embraced. And I was just like, oh, I don't belong here. I'm not Black. I'm not a person of African descent. And the brother, Derek Westbrook, was like, you Black, you're from Puerto Rico, you don't know anything. You need to take these classes and let me mentor you. And the next year I ran and became president. But a couple of days after I became president, all the Latino organizations, the sororities included, Omega Phi Beta, I love them, but them sisters were horrible to me. People began to write op-eds in the school newspaper about how I was a sellout. Thank God we didn't have social media, because I would have never made it. I would have never made it. I had Latino administrators calling me into their office like, oh, you want to be Black now? You need to pick a side. And I was like, this is insane. And I kind of just became like that movie, I'm Black, y'all, I'm Black, y'all, I'm blacker than Black, and I'm Black, y'all. That's how I became. I changed my major to Africana Studies. I changed my certificate from Latin American Studies to political science. I interned at the New York State Legislature, which was my first wake up to how jacked up electoral politics is. And again, that was 1992-3. But the most defining moment for me that made me an organizer, and I think this is key because I was not born into a movement household, was the LA Rebellion and the uprising after the 4 officers were acquitted of beating Rodney King. For our generation, what younger folks need to understand is we didn't have that access, right? Like nobody owned a camcorder. Them things were like $3,000 back then. The only footage we ever saw of Black people being brutalized were in documentaries. But for our generation, which then infused with the hip hop really radical politic and music at that time, we saw it and we were like, how are these officers not going to go to jail? We see the video. And I woke up and LA was burning. And I went up to campus and all the Black and Latino students were together and we were in a ballroom. And professors were talking to us, telling us history and stuff. And then the president, who at that time, he's Black, he was like, you need to quiet this anger. Do not show people that you are those type of African-American and Hispanic students that are burning LA to the ground. Do not be a disgrace. And I just remember the older folk, like the professors especially, were like, F you. And we all walked out. And we walked for 4 miles from our campus to the major Black community here. And so I saw that, I ran and all of that. And then I joined the Malcolm X grassroots movement. And once I joined the Malcolm X grassroots movement, after I graduated from Cornell, and lived in Brooklyn. And I was in Brooklyn at the right time. Gentrification was not there. It was all Black and brown folks, and hip hop was at its peak at that moment. I was going to shows. I'm seeing Gil Scott-Heron, Dead Prez, The Welfare Poets, Gwendolyn Brooks, Sonia Sanchez, Badu, Black Star. I mean, every night I was at a cultural event, and every day I was organizing and learning the skills to be an organizer with the Malcolm X grassroots movement. And lastly, I think the 2 things that people, or the one place that people find where they begin to know my work, is the article I wrote in 2001, Who is Black? And 21 years later, I'm always like, people still read that? Like the syntax wasn't great. There was some grammatical errors. But the reason I wrote it was because when I joined the Malcolm X grassroots movement, I found my political home. And we were at one of our main meetings, and a brother at that time was like, yo, Rosa, you Black, but you really ain't Black. And I was like, well, your mom is white and mine's not, so who's Black? And one of the elders was like, you need to go write that right now. I'm like, I'm not a good writer. I don't write. He's like, go write it. I'm like, who's going to publish this? Again, this is 2001. The best paper you wanted to get to in New York at that time was the Village Voice or the Source magazine. And I was like, they're not going to publish this. And somehow it made it to Davy D, who is the foremost hip hop journalist of our time and archivist. He brought me on his show. And then I got a call a couple weeks later from the Nation of Islam. And the Nation of Islam to this day, it has the only, after the Amsterdam News, a weekly paper called The Final Call. And people got their beef with the Nation and Farrakhan, and I'm like, I don't even get into that. What the Nation was 30 years ago and what it is now could be very different for some people. But the main thing was they published it. Once they publish it, that paper also goes into the correctional prison systems throughout the country. So then I began to get letters from people locked up, and it just kind of blew up. And then a month later, I wrote this article about Russell Simmons and calling him out on his perceived sexual assaults 20 years ago and stuff. And to echo Alejandrina's point of when it got really bad for me mentally was Russell Simmons then basically had me banned from all hip hop events. And at that time, hip hop politics was growing. And we had co-founded the Hip Hop Political Convention, which a year later we would have one of the foremost gatherings and create a hip hop political agenda. And he did that. So every event I went to, they'd be like, Russell says, you can't come in. And I was like, what the F? But at one event, I hear somebody go, your sister Rosa Clemente, and I turn around and it's Chuck D. And I'm like, I'm a Public Enemy fanatic since I was 9 years old. I'm like, hi, Mr. D. And he's like, it's Chuck. He's like, I got you forever. And he's like, in fact, you're coming in with me now and you're going to speak, and then me and you are going to go walk out and have dinner. And after that, it was just with MXG, everything was so gratifying. I began to see my sister and brother begin to soak in my stuff. My dad began to call me and be like, I don't know this. I'm angry too. What book? My mom would be like, we didn't send you to college for this, but I'm proud of you. And for a long time, they were like, people pay you to talk? Why? You talk all the time. And I know this is long for me because I know how important narratives are. And after I ran for vice president and the way I was treated after that was also, if not the most depressing time period of my life ever. And it was hard. And I couldn't get hired. I couldn't pay my rent. My parents were like, why did we send you to Cornell and all this? You're married, you have a baby, you can't even afford food. And I was like, what the F am I doing? My husband's formerly incarcerated. He can't get a good, it was crazy. And I got a call from Dr. Shabazz from UMass Amherst, and Dr. Shabazz was like, you need a break. You need to process the last almost 20 years of your life. Come here and get your PhD. And of course, I talked to Dr. Turner. Unfortunately, he just recently passed away. But the queen of all queens, Dr. Maita Moreno Vega. And at the same time, when I met her, she was like, if you're serious about this, I'll see you at the Caribbean Cultural Center. And to this day, for Yvette and for me, for so many of our circle, Maita is the queen in the sense of she has always been unapologetically African descendant. She won't even say she's Afro-Latino. She's like, I am an African descendant. But Martha is one of the few women in this country that even has a cultural institution that still exists. She went to Puerto Rico to retire and she started 2 more organizations. I'm like, I just texted her now. I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, oh, I'm putting up some shingles on a roof. I'm like, dude, you shouldn't be on a roof. Me and Yvette are in our chairs talking right now to dope women. and other folks, So I'll cut the rest of my time after this. It's a long story. I mean, I turned 50. Last thing I will say on this is, Alejandrina and everybody, you're right. It catches up to you. I've probably had the worst 5 years of health ever. And I really didn't correlate it to nonstop working, because I've always been a type of person that I find fun and levity. And I've always been a type that I'm like, I'm just going to watch The Walking Dead for the next 3 days and nobody talk to me. But I didn't realize. And then you turn 50 and things are falling apart in generally. But the amount of stress on my heart, my body, weight gain, every day. And I had to realize, I've seen most of my elders pass away. I've had comrades in my life that are younger that are dead of heart attacks. And I thought I wasn't that person. And I had to realize I am. And now what does that mean in the work I do for the rest of my life? What it essentially means is I don't care to deal with whiteness, white supremacy in that way. I don't give it my time and energy in that way. What I give my time and energy now to is not only processing, writing, and mentoring, but supporting other organizations, but particularly continuing to uplift not my Afro-Black identity as a phenotype, because it's real easy for people to be like, oh, the hair, the clothes, the dance. I'm talking about the politics. Okay, I'm not just talking about hair and food is what makes us Afro-Black, Latino, Latina, Latinas. What makes you that is if you have a politic of Black political revolutionary struggle in this country throughout the world. And if you can't say that, then to me, you're not Afro-Black Latino, as dark as you could be or phenotypically. If you don't have the politic of Black liberation like that, I'm not rolling with you. But that's taken me 3 decades to get here. You know what I'm saying? It's been a long journey. A great one, though. So.
Yes, thank you for that. I really want to uplift health and self-care. So as somebody who also loves hip hop, has grown up with so much, we have lost so many people recently. And every time I turn around, it's like one of these, icons of my childhood has passed away. We just lost Coolio. I was like, wait a minute, what's going on? But I think it's so important for activists to have that community care and that self-care. So I'm uplifting that in with everything going on in the world, pandemic after pandemic after pandemic. Taking care of ourselves is really important. And I think it's also, we look at our ancestors and what they've gone through. And I think about my father, who I recently lost, and really his health issues because he worked so hard. Worked so hard. So, the movement doesn't move without us. So it is important for us to care for ourselves and find the ways to care for each other. So I hope that in the spirit of this community that we will lean on one another when we need that support and that uplifting. So with that very powerful experience and testimony, bringing into another very powerful woman, Yvette, what has brought you to this place?
So first and foremost, gracias, Rosa, to lift Marta Moreno Vega, who took us under her wings. I want to honor that and, honor my other sister who taught me so much, Marinieves Alba. Also, just hip hop and life and love. So I've been good, right? So turn my good time up now. I want to push back. I'm really excited to have been invited. I'm a very colleague and dear friend, Julia Mejia, and just seeing who I was on the panel with. But this panel should have been called Political Identity and Racism. When we put colorism and discrimination, we're diluting what it really is, which is racism. And not racism from the outside. I'm talking racism from the inside. This conversation gets put as an other when it's a conversation within. this conversation gets only related to white supremacy when it's someone outside of this, when for me, as this Black, unapologetic Latina, the white supremacy within the Latino community is even worse than the white supremacy outside of it. So let's get that out. And, it's time to have everyone has touched on it, and I think we need to go deeper. I was born Black. I moved Black. I'm from Colón. Colón is the second largest province of Panama. Yo soy nacida y criada en Colón. That's Black every day. I am of Caribbean grandparents. That's Black with your chin up. You don't put your head down for anybody. I'm Black in the segregated U.S. Jim Crow of the United States in another land, in Panama, where, thank goodness, for my first 9 years of my life, all I saw was a Black firefighter, a Black police officer, a Black nurse, my mother, a Black head of Panama Canal Security, my father. So I was born centered in Blackness and unapologetic about it. I knew racism through my parents' experience, my grandfather coming from Martinique as a construction worker of the Panama Canal. Let us not get it twisted. Only 1% of the US really did that. That canal was built by African Caribbean men and women, predominantly from Jamaica on my maternal side. So I know Blackness from birth. Colón, even within the context of Panama, has been denied in a different way in the context of Panama because it's so Black. Colón es África de Panamá. Colón fue la puerta de entrada de los esclavizados en las Américas. Colón was the point of entry of enslaved Africans. Those waters of that Atlantic Ocean is where they landed in los palenques de Colombia que nos vendieron por $1, because remember, all of that was Colombia at one point before we got our independence. So this is not just about political identity. This is about the racism and how that racism disrupts our political identity. Because we are still walking around, fast forward, in this country where we have managed to lean into Latino through white gaze. So even though we are all here saying Afro-Latino, it still becomes a struggle because, mira, yo hablo español, check. Yo nací en Latinoamericana, check. Yo, if you know Latin American history, you should not get caught up with my last name, as I say in my poem, check. Y todavía yo tengo que estar explicando. Like, I still have to explain myself. And then the funny thing is that those that don't even speak Spanish can get away with it. If I didn't speak Spanish, I wouldn't even have been able to get in anywhere, because literally their weight, the Latinos wait to find something to say, no, ella es Latina, ella solo es negra. Sí, yo soy negra, y tú también. It was not till I came to this country que yo me paré frente a alguien negro looking at me going, I'm not Black, I'm Dominican, I'm Puerto Rican. But you're still Black. And we have managed to get away with that in this country. And not racism in our country, in Latin America, gets itself played out totally different. Here, it puts Latinos to pick a side. And if you are little light and you can lean into whiteness, we run for that whiteness so fast, it ain't even funny. I did not have the option to wake up when I got to college. I was awoke from the time I was born. I knew what it meant to be Black. And we have different experiences. Rosa and I are sisters in the struggle. But I know for a fact that Rosa has gotten into places differently than I have just from being lighter than me. But what Rosa has done differently is she brings us along. Or Marinieves, or Marta even. Like, literally, I have been in spaces where my Afro-Latina sisters who are lighter than me get in faster. Aisha knows my sister's a little lighter than me. My sister looks just like me, but my sister's lighter than me. And people will see us together y le hablan a mi hermana en español y a mí en inglés. So where are we really having the conversation around political power and true Black liberation? Because if you are just thinking that Latino liberation stands on its own, no, because Latino liberation has to go into what is the African American conversation within this country. Because the same Latinas that are discriminatory within the Latino context, when they go to predominantly white settings, is when they realize they ain't white. But you play your whiteness out on me. But you go in predominantly white setting, they'll be like, you ain't white. What just happened? So we need to, if we are truly having a conversation about identity, then let's call it what it is. Sometimes in this country and in my experience here over 25 years, the ugliest moments of racism has been within the Latino community. Like Rosa, I was received with ease in an African American community because we know we were dropped off everywhere. And the only difference is we speak different colonized languages because this is not our natural language. But we were dropped off everywhere. Argentina, so please do not tell me que no hay negros en Chile, que no hay negros en Argentina. Sí lo hay. Sí lo hay. When we understand that we literally, within the Latino regional context, have the largest population of people of African descent. We outnumber in our region this country. But yet we still trying to figure out, después de Nigeria, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Santo Domingo, Haiti, and Haiti needs to be in this conversation because it's not there on its own regard. US, but yet I've been standing in front of people como ahora estaba diciendo. I was in a store recently y yo noté el acento colombiano. So I immediately was like, okay, I'll speak to you in Spanish. Yo noté tu acento colombiano. The woman serving me, when I speak to her in Spanish, she goes blank. So I'm like, are you okay? She's like, ay, estoy tan sorprendida que usted habla el español y lo habla también. I'm so surprised you speak Spanish and you speak it so well. And I said, yo soy panameña. And she said, yo soy colombiana. I said, yo sé. Yo reconozco tu acento. And then she tells me she's from Cali. I'm like, really? And you look surprised to see me? Tú eres de Cali y tú estás sorprendida de verme a mí. That's how deeply rooted our stuff goes. We come here and we forget where we are from and what our community looks like. And nobody from Colombia should be surprised to see me. Some of the oldest palenques in the region are in Colombia. To be surprised to see me is a denial of you. I have triggered something in you that says, yo no quiero ser negra, because let us not get twisted. To stand in and centering Blackness and unapologetically Blackness in this society, in this country, comes with a lot. Comes with exclusion, comes with threats, comes with name calling, comes with uninvitations to things, comes with all the labels that get tagged to Black women who speak truth. So it ain't no easy, oh yeah, let's be, and for I think everybody has your journey, but I have an issue with the come to joy lately of the Afro-Latino movement that's happening without the real story that goes with it, or the real pain that goes with it. Some of us have not had the option to wait 20-something years to say I'm Black. And I say to everybody on here today, if you can say I'm Black, then I'm with you. If you still trying to figure out just to say I'm Black and you have a struggle with it, then you need to do your work.
Yeah, can I just build on something Yvette said, which is so important, right? Like Richie Perez from the Young Lords, when he was teaching us, he would always say we have to outroot bello malo, bello bueno, right? And that's the same thing. I don't think I disagree with Yvette. I think I would push back a little on like white supremacy from our communities, but also I don't have Yvette's experience. And one thing that I've always been clear, because people try to like try to marginalize me by being like, oh, you mad light skin, you ain't really Black. And I'm like, you know what? Then you know nothing about Blackness in this world or America. Like, how did I even get this? Like, I have a nose that's distinctly African descendant, but my light skin. But I have to also understand there's a very specific African-American struggle, and there's a very specific struggle that dark-skinned Black women in general have to face. So I would say as our lands are becoming decolonized, then we have to decolonize our minds. And it's consistent decolonization. But Yvette is absolutely right. This last 5 or 6 years, we could be like, it is amazing to see a younger generation questioning who they thought they were. Like, I'm not Hispanic, that means descendant of Spain. Like, but it hasn't been a movement around Black liberation in it. And it's been hijacked by a lot of Latina women in Hollywood. And I say this knowing and having been part of a big movie in Hollywood, and the response that I have gotten and the embrace that I have gotten from the particularly African-American and Asian community in Hollywood is more loving and embracing than the Latinx community in Hollywood. Because there's about 5 of them that run everything. They're mostly women, and they're all anti-Black. And we've tried to work with some of them, but they keep doing the same, stupid ass anti-Black shit all the time. And Yvette is completely right, because it's funny. I was talking to Madi Nieves, who is a comrade of mine. I just texted her. And Madi taught me a long time ago. She's like, we are people of African descent, because Madi's light skin, and people always made assumptions about who she was and what she was. But she also reminded me, she's like, girl, I know you're super proud to be Black, but you got to understand the nuances to that you still have a form of privilege, and you got to like be good with that. And, you know, she has done that for so many of us, but the idea that we have a small group of now visible, quote, Latina women who are hijacking this movement, we have to, people like me and Yvette have to push back and name names, because we were taught that. We're supposed to do that. And we're a little older. And the older you get, you really do give 0 Fs. Because you're like, I've been here half my life. I might not be here another 50 years. I don't have time for this. You want to learn? We got 9 million books. But the idea that is now us as Afro-Black, Latino, Latinx identified folks who've been doing the work, that this has been part of identity, that we're now being marginalized. Like, I'm not going to stay quiet. And it does come at an expense. It comes at an expense like this. You end up sacrificing, which is fine. If you're a revolutionary and an organizer, you're not doing this for money. You're doing this because it's part of who you are to the day you die. But I'm sure Yvette, me and a couple other sisters, I've had 3 programs this month canceled, all from women of color who are DEI officers who were like, it's Hispanic Heritage Month. We want you to talk about being Hispanic. I'm like, do you even know what the word Hispanic means? Like, I'll give you 5. They're all the same. Hispanic means descendant of Spain, i.e. that's our rapist and colonizer. So you want to bring me for Hispanic Heritage Month to not talk about who I am to uplift whiteness, slavery, and rape, y'all are crazy. And you're making mad money off this bull crap DEI stuff. That was what me and Yvette went through in the 90s. It was called multiculturalism. And every campus institution got a diversity offer. Now after George Floyd, billions of dollars to DEI work. But none of these corporations are trying to change their practices because they're all capitalistic ventures anyway. But to have your own women doing this, we could deal with it. It doesn't mean it doesn't hurt when it happens. It doesn't mean that then me and someone like Yvette have to be like, how do we navigate this? How do I write the email? And then I was like, you know what? Just write exactly what you feel and who you are. And that's too bad that their employees had a missed opportunity to see someone like me, because I believe in my power and my political power. And that's why they didn't want me. Not because of Hispanic. They booked me, they Googled me and were like, hell no. She's blackness? I don't think so. No.
I want to offer a few things into the space. I can share my own. So I actually lived in Spain for 4 years in my childhood. So anytime anybody wants to talk to me about, oh, we're Hispanic, I'm like, baby, let's have a conversation, because they don't claim us, okay? But the second part is, I love that Yvette brought this into the space. I actually said on my Twitter account I was going to push back against this concept of colorism, because there's a wonderful book that's out now by Tanya K. Hernandez, and she talks about this explicitly. Instead of talking about colorism, we need to talk about anti-Black racism. And I'll also offer this in the spirit of, this is Indigenous Peoples Weekend, right? Anti-indigeneity is another thing that we deeply need to talk about within Latinidad, within Latin Americanness, right? But we need to start talking about that. It's very easy for us to talk about our complexions and our hair and all of that because it distracts us from the conversation about whiteness and white supremacy. And one of the things that we try to say, oh, talking about race in Latin America is so complicated, it's so hard. There are white people in Latin America. There are a lot of white Latin Americans who immigrate to the United States and are upset that they don't get that access, that key to whiteness, because of their last name, because of their accent, because they don't speak English. And that is one of the very, very difficult things that I think we haven't come to reckon with. So I want to offer, as we talk about anti-Black racism, how you challenge that, what your experiences are with colorism. It is a conversation we do need to have. I personally think colorism is a conversation we need to have amongst Latinx people of color, Black Latinx people. But also, I really want to talk about this idea of how do we address and really come to grips with the fact that being Black Latin American is very sexy right now. So you have younger people who are happy to be like, yes, I'm Afro-Latinx, I'm Afro-Latina, I'm Afro-Latina, Afro-Latino, but they don't actually have the history and the politics that comes along with that. And recognizing, that all of us are here because we're talking about the representation of Latinas, of Latinidad, of Afro-Latinidad, specifically with this panel, into politics, our work, our political nature, our structures, and how we have this gatekeeping. Because there is a gatekeeping of whiteness within Latinidad that Rosa very clearly spoke to. We see it in Hollywood. We see it with the In the Heights movie. I'm going to shake the table a little bit. Bad Bunny, that whole album is made off of Black Dominican music. How many Black Dominican artists did he feature on that record? Okay. So I think he's actually a pretty decent guy, but I'm like, this is a white Puerto Rican, let's be clear, who is profiting off of Black people's music. The producer is Black, but he's in the background. How often do we have Black people working in the background, but we never see us in the forefront, right? So I'm curious to hear from all of you. I'll start with Aura, because you talked about your experiences as, a lighter skinned Black woman coming from Colombia, coming from a Black community. How do you confront that? How do you deal with issues around anti-Black racism? How do you deal with colorism, within families? I know I've seen that in my own family and within, our community as a whole.
Yeah, I was actually gonna say center or bring back the conversation about our own struggles with our own families, because I deeply believe that the first revolution is internal. So if you have it, if you live in a home, it's sad for me to say this, in a home where you struggle to get some members of your family to understand that some of the things that they say are racist and that the way that they refer to other people is racist, is hard. Or when you try, and we're not even talking about the LGBTQ plus community here, but when you have people in Latin America that are like extremely anti everything, because it's that internalized racism and internalized colonialism that I think Dr. Clemente and Yvette mentioned too. When you have other people in your own community unwilling to see a reality, it's really hard, and to try to box you into, well, you're lighter skin, you speak, you're great. Like I heard this, I work in the environmental movement, which is highly dominant, not the, and the environmental justice movement, but the broader environmental justice movement is very highly, dominated by middle class white people. And you know how many times have people told me, "Oh, but you're great. White people love you." And I'm just like, what kind of shit is that? I mean, so then other people don't love me, or like, I'm not like, like what is this? So this is the kind of messaging and terminology that we need to get to the root cause, because it's corrupting everything else. I was in a candidate forum in my local community when I ran for office. I was standing against another candidate, young woman like me. I'm in my mid-40s, young woman, and she's black. And she turned around and said to everybody that they shouldn't vote for me because I was not black, and that because this community traditionally has been led by black people. So the leaders in this community have been traditionally white people. So how dare I was, a Latina, quote unquote, trying to, take the power from them. But you see, this is the messaging, and this is the corruption that I think we're trying to lift up here, because this is the kind of internalized messaging and racism that we have to deal with, and sometimes, and I felt, actually in that moment, I felt extreme compassion, because I know better, you know, I know better than than what she's saying. And instead of me attacking her about like, how dare you talk to me about being, don't you know I'm black, you know. I said, we need to overcome these things. Like we need to unify. Like all these issues actually affect us more, and is a broader plan from for this capitalist society that had like made us fight against each other for resources and for space, and that needs to end. So okay, I have a lot more to say, but I'm just gonna end it there. And I think we have an incredible opportunity now. I have a nephew, which I struggle with my own family to try to get him to be more diverse, like understanding more diversity, more inclusion, what that really is, because it's a daily struggle with my family too. That it's like, well, no, we're not that. We're this. So it's messy. This stuff is messy, and I like to remind people that this is anchored in love, and also in these conversations need to be anchored in love and understanding and in compassion, and seeing that we're not all sometimes, so woke maybe, or so there, but that we can maybe hold some space for people to have these difficult conversations, like Yvette was saying, like, why are you surprised, Joe? Like, there's a bunch of shitload of people like me in Cali. Por Dios. Mis tías, like tus tías también. You know what I mean? So I just wanted to bring that back, because it's very easy to go out there with all your books and be like, oh, you don't know this and I know that. And like, if we are going to change how this is viewed for the future generations and for the generations now, it's going to require a lot of understanding and a lot of love and a lot of taking people where they're at. Thank you.
Yeah, love is truly the revolution. And I want to first of all, just thank the folks that are out there commenting and talking about their own experiences with their families in the chat. There's a lot of richness happening. And I want to uplift what Rosa put in the chat. Until you understand white supremacy, anything and everything else will confuse you. You know, and it's so true. And, you know, we talk about white supremacy, it's an umbrella of oppression. So we talked about queerness, transness, we talked about ableism. Exactly. So I really, you know, Alejandrina, I'm so grateful to meet you and know you and have you in the conversation. And I really would love to hear about your experiences and how that shows up in your work, because we do not talk about ableism enough. We talk about how racism is coded into our language. So think about, you know, terms like trabajo como un negro. Like, I'm working like a Black person. What does that mean? But I know one thing that we
Ese
struggle with
lenguaje
too is
lo
like
tenemos que
ableism.
cambiar.
Exactly. Like ableism is coded into our language as well. So as we, you know, work to liberate ourselves, I want to hear more from you, if you will, to talk to us, Alejandrina, about your experiences and, you know, how you deal with that in your work.
Thank you for that question. I think, well, one, I just want to say that the whole like divide and conquer thing in a different way. Similarly, I feel it because well, I'm gonna backtrack a little, or go back a little bit to when I was at UT. It was always at the time I knew, you know, again, I've been in, I use a power wheelchair. And, you know, I've always known that forever and ever, obviously. But at UT, you know, being Mexican American was like at the forefront, right? And I mentioned that. And at the time, I think it was right after my first year of UT. I was an orientation advisor, so I welcomed in the new class coming in the summer, and I learned the word differently abled. Before that, I would always say like I'm a person with a disability, da 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 da. And I learned that, and I was like, wow, like that sounds empowering. Like I'm gonna start using that. Like that really, like that's me. You know, like I'm differently abled, and I went with that. I called myself that my entire time at UT. The reason I bring this up is because the last year I was there, I ran for student body president, and I never had the like my identities when I was running, like the campaign, didn't really like never ever crossed my mind. I was just thinking about the policy aspect of running, and you know, making sure that on the campaign trail, like we would talk, me and the person I ran with us with VP would talk about those things. And in the last 3 days of the trail, because we had, I mean, and literally imagine a campaign, like a team, like campaign managers, like, and now looking back, I'm like, what in the world? Like, this is wild. That is a reality. Like student go, and anyways, but we had a whole team, and my campaign manager, oh, that sounds weird. My campaign managers would say like, you know what, like, let's talk about your identities. And I was like, sure. I didn't really think about it. And all of a sudden, when we were putting out graphics and whatnot out, it became, you know, if this ticket wins, Alejandrina is gonna be the first Latina president at UT Austin, the first differently abled president at UT Austin, the 10th woman being elected for president at UT Austin. Like it was that over and over. And when I saw that, I was like, shit. I was like, I don't know if I want to like. I was like, I just want to talk about policy. Like, I don't really want to like dive into this like us as a ticket. Like, wow, look at all these like identities coming into play. Like, I was like, let's talk. Like, yes, I'm not shying away from that, but like, I don't want to make it seem like just cause I'm this, means this. We say, no, 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 no. We're talking about student issues. We're talking about, being at the forefront of representing students and like, having that in mind of, cause, I was really involved with activism, student organizing, like all these things. And so we ended up winning. And now it was just like, Alejandrina, the first this, the first that, the first, and I was like, oh no, it was wild. I mean, like it was cool in a way that it's like, wow, yeah, we did that. Like that's the thing. At the time, like, wow, yeah, we're president and VP at a fucking 50,000 over 50,000 student institution. Like it was like cool, but it's like no, 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 no. Let's talk about the real work. But I mentioned that because again, differently able. And I leave UT, I leave campus, I start working. Real world hits me. I applied to a lot of jobs, and I ableism came at me hard because I had experienced things at UT that were really horrible, but now this is like life. Like what is a job? Like how, like yes, internships, I had those things, like blah, 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 blah. But like, this is an actual, like, I need to apply. I need to, all this stuff. And I did over like, I mean, as many of us have experienced, like a lot of applications. And at the time I didn't really think much of it. And then I was like, oh, what if I'm being discriminated? Because I was like, no, there's no way. Like, done some things, I'm involved. There's no way. And I was like, I don't know. And because of a mentor, so shout out to everyone in the space who has mentioned mentoring, because that has been, again, that's a community aspect right there, is that's what has kept me going all throughout. I mean, since I was a freshman at UT to like even after, like one of my mentors got me on the campaign team. So since then, I've been doing campaign and like policy work. I worked at the Texas Legislature House of Representatives in 2019, and that was another piece where like ableism really, like, I had people, I was in the fellowship, and me and the other person in a different fellowship, we were in the same office. We would take turns, like on different days, welcoming constituents into the office, or like people just coming in, lobbyists and just community members, whoever. And one time, there was a lady that came in, and she saw me, and that day, I think it was my friend's turn to like welcome people in, and she saw me. She went directly to me, pulled out her little card thing she had, and she just had this before. This has happened to me before, but like it just shook me because okay. She puts her hand on my head and she says, "I'm going to pray for you." What is happening? I couldn't say anything. I'm in my again I'm dressed for the job, right? I'm in a blazer. I look nice, like I'm presentable. I have my glasses on, and I'm like, what? And how do you like? No, like I've had this done before, but like on the bus or like on the sidewalk or like with. Actually, it's never happened when I'm with a friend, but that so far. But like in an office, I am a working person. Like, what is going on? And it was really wild. All that to say, like picking things here and there, just to get a bigger picture. Fast forward to right now. I was working at a nonprofit, and the ableism within the workspace happened. And I quit. And that has never, like, with no lineup, like what's next. I'm in that process. But what I'm saying is that like I ended up like throughout all the experiences that I had, I was so tired of it. I lasted there like a year and a half, a year or something. And you would never expect this nonprofit in a way, right? I mean, you never expect, it doesn't matter about like we have said here, white supremacy and the racism and the able it's doesn't what is at you. That's it. You disabled, you disabled. You black, you black. You what like you know what I mean? Like it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You can be respectable. You cannot. You can cuss them out. You cannot. At the end of the day, you are where you are. And like that to me hit me at this job because I was like, y'all are not accommodating me. Like, and I had given y'all. I was given the space to do a freaking presentation on like ableism and how ableism is interwoven in all, especially racism, right? You cannot undo racism without undoing ableism. Like that is, as we've said, that is white supremacy at work, right? We're talking about the language that we use. When we say crazy, what we're talking about? Like, there's we don't use that, right? When we say mad, that's another one. When we say phobia, and it's like phobia, so like you can't say it like Islamophobe, and it's like no, let's say anti da 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 da, right? Or I could go on and on and on and on about the language we use, and it's wild that like we're not taught this, or like it's just so interwoven. Yes, so they can divide and conquer. Like that's the whole point. Like that is the whole point. And so with my job, like when I quit, I felt like I burned the place down because I sent my resignation letter to the whole to like our internal, but like the whole what's it called? The listserv, right? So it wasn't just HR knowing what was happening and my manager knowing what was happening. I was like, no. I'm going to leave and I'm going to let all of you know what's going on because we can't pretend to be DEI, whatever. And, oh, Alejandrina, your work on disability justice and justice this. And I'm like, but like, what's happening to me? What are you like? Wait, why? The fact that I had to quit, like, is that bad? And in my mind, I was like, man, like it was that bad that like I just left, right? And I was lucky enough that I had colleagues. We did a virtual walkout, 12, 14 of us, 15 of us, right? A virtual walkout. We changed our Slack, our little Slack image, and it was like accessibility for all. That's what we had. And everyone emailed their manager for like, because my thing was that they were not accommodating to like I have an attendant and like what would happen when my attendant wouldn't show up or like things like that. That's out of my control, and that's the reality of being disabled, right? And yeah, they helped me out, and I mentioned all those pieces because now, as right, I started off saying I'm differently abled. What am I saying right now? Disabled. I'm fucking disabled, and that's what it is, right? That's the reality. Sometimes I cannot do things. Sometimes I can't. Like, oh, mind over matter, overcome, and it's like, no, that's not a thing. And I mentioned the whole virtual walkout because, again, community, right? That we built that up together and walked out, and like it was a whole thing. And it's wild to me now that like as we're talking about, again, racism, right? Also, ableism is interwoven there, and I know I'm like super like talking into the disability pieces of these things, but it's because I want to not just embrace like yeah embrace who I am and all that stuff, but it's like honoring also my space in this space. Like that's what I've been experiencing And I want to share that with all of you that, like, hey, call it out, right? If someone's being ableist, call that shit out, you know, right? Like, at the end of the day, we in this together, and it's a constant, like you can't just, oh, I earned my disability justice advocate point today. It's like, no, do that all the time, right? So thank you for letting me share that.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's you know, I always say it's not a destination because people don't want to do this work because they're like, they want that sticker, they want that gold star. It's like, nope, got my disability justice, my anti-racist, da da da. It's a journey. So, and like white supremacy is constantly moving and changing and adapting. And unfortunately, our time together is coming to a close, but I want to pull out some themes here. And what I'm hearing a lot from you and Aura was about being the token. How many of us have been brought into movements and organizations and have been the token? So it's like, oh, we got our Latina check, we got our disabled person check, but then they don't create spaces where you're actually safe. The space is still unsafe. The work has not been done. So I love what Rosa, what you talked about, how it was multiculturalism in the 90s and now it's DEI. It keeps shifting, but they haven't done the work yet, clearly. And then that's why we have Yvette and Rosa going into spaces, tearing them down. I also, Yvette is very modest. I want to talk about La Red de las Mujeres Afro, the organization that she's created that actually has the visibility for Black Latinas throughout the region and the diaspora. So important. And it's so important as we name how people come to this country and are shocked to see our Black faces speaking Spanish and all of those things. So, but I do want to talk about, I want to close, I want to make sure Yvette and Rosa, you have some closing thoughts around, you know, what is that work that we have to do? How do we combat against spaces where they have the 5 Latinas coming in, and then those Latinas are gatekeeping who gets to be perceived as Latino, Latina, Latine, Latinx, all of that in our spaces? The level of gatekeeping is still very strong and it's still very much there. So I'm going to ask if you could keep it a little shorter because I want to invite the audience to ask questions as well. Some great comments, as we've said. So please drop your question in the chat and we will do our best to get to it. So I'll ask you, Rosa.
Super short for me because I'm gonna show books. That's always, I'm like, read, everybody read. And I have Yvette Madi Neves's and Dr. Vega's book, but it's in my super secure archives because they all signed it. But I encourage everybody to get their book, Afro-Latina Women Warriors, about Afro-Latinas in Latin America. But I'll say this, Alejandra, same experience that you had with having in an electoral political space, having to be like enough. That space for me before the Green Party was the ACLU. They brought me on to work. I was director of immigrant rights. They got angry because I was supporting their workers to be unionized and I got fired. And I remember where I got fired because I was in Boston and literally was at the National ACLU Conference International. And they walked up to me and were like, you're fired because you as a manager have now given the rest of the workers the ability to unionize, which is crazy because it was Amnesty International. But lastly, look, at the end of the day, to me, the politics are most important. But right now, I don't think many of us are able to comprehend the level of white violence and terror that's coming down the pipeline. And maybe like someone like, if you live in Boston, you'll know that. If you live in a major city, but I live in Albany, New York, the capital. And I've worked in electoral, but I ran. I would never run again. And I have no faith in these two parties. To me, the electoral political project in America is dead. People don't like it. People don't want to deal with it. I mean, I've been dealing with it for a long, long time. I had to leave the Green Party because of the white racism from the men in the Green Party, you know, and then I realized I was used, that was a token, but I still brought hip hop politics and my agenda into it. So I encourage everyone to really understand the gravity of the violence we're going to face. And white folks have their own identity politic. It's called white supremacy. And if white women 2 times delivered or 1 time delivered the former president, if people think he or the Republicans can't win, they're not dealing with the reality of our situation. They're not dealing with the fear in our communities. They're not dealing with a Republican Party that is always down for each other to the death, while the Democratic Party has moderated every right, which is why we're where we're now. So I encourage people to join an organization. If you don't want to be an activist in that way, donate. If you're into electoral politics, go hard. If you're not into electoral politics, go hard. And I'll just drop, I think, Jamila, you referenced Dr. Hernandez's book, which is The Racial Innocence. Incredible. Dr. Vega, that's all I have to say, Dr. Vega. Afro-Puerto Rican Women Building Environmental Justice, which Alda just lifted up, and Drops of Inclusivity, which is specifically about Puerto Ricans and meaning, but has it has woven into it disability rights. And as an older person who was taught to be afraid of people who were disabled, I had to then unlearn that behavior, and it wasn't easy and it was hard as F. But in order for me to be a good mentor and growing and not becoming stagnant, I had to look at myself and be like, why do you feel like this? Where does it come from? What have you been doing wrong? So I really just appreciate this incredible space of just strong ass revolutionaries. Thank you.
And, I want to pick up and go short too, because I think, I said to Rosa in the chat that it's almost like there's a cycle of when the issue becomes the end thing. But in every cycle, there seems to be less and less a connection to the history of what got us there. And it's almost like people need to be reintroduced to Rosa Clemente. People need to be introduced to Marta Moreno Vega. People need to be introduced to the Women Warriors book. Like, I spoke pre-COVID at an event, and I was the keynote speaker, and folks knew more of the folks that have become popular through social media than even me, who's been in 11 books and, has been writing about this for over 25 years. So in saying that, I say we need to be consistent. This should not be the extra conversation. This should be the conversation in every conversation that we are having. And also, we need to be careful of when we are excluding. I don't need to get invited to everything. But if you are not inviting me and you're going into a space where I have been having the conversation, you know what? Let me just call it out. There's an event coming up next week at UMass Boston. And the Africana Studies Department has been the leading department on the UMass Boston campus to have the Afro-Latino conversation, even beyond the Gaston Institute, which is the Latino organization institute there. Right now, the Africana Studies Department is fighting for the department because the administration, and you can go read the newspapers, it's been in the papers, the administration right now, including some Black folks who are playing gatekeepers, are the anti-Blackness towards this department has never been seen in such a way on this campus. So anyone that is having an event, knowing that this is happening, the exclusion of the African American Studies Department, and you're going to have an Afro-Latino event, excluding that department, excluding the organization that has led the conversation on the campus, that's anti-Blackness to me. That's crossing the picket line to me. So I have colleagues that are on there, the flyers out, you do your thing. But to me, and this is where the liberation does not lose its footing. Either you're in it or you're not. Because to me, that shows a level of bias. And it's also showing that it's easier to lean into the Latino part, but then we show our anti-Blackness in that. Because to me, that's anti-Blackness. So I think we need to be consistent. And also, we need to stop. I'm doing an event on Tuesday, and folks are nervous. Like Rosa was saying, they invite you to do Hispanic Heritage Month presentation, but once they see my fro, my locks, Rosa's fro with her earrings and her hip hop, they start worrying about what we gonna say. And the thing is that if you really want us there and you want us to speak the truth, then you need to allow the truth to happen on its own. But don't start, oh, we don't know, what are you gonna say? We're not ready. Sometimes our young people are more ready for this real conversation than some of the adults. So I think consistency is key. I too, health-wise, the grief, the pain, the shock at times when there are days you just get up and I just want to be Yvette. And then there's days that someone reminds me that I'm Black and that I shouldn't speak Spanish and that that's not the norm. And I get all these things. In this last year with my dad passing away and having surgery, I've learned that this is not just work for me. And I don't know Alejandrina and Aura to the extent that I know Rosa and Aisha. This is not work. This is truth. This is our life. This is our purpose. So we don't check out. We don't get breaks. We don't get time out, right? Because it's never ending, So I think, I hope that we do better. We need to do better in the Latino community around this conversation. We have a generation that's living schizophrenic lives because when they walk out that door, they're Black and they're having Black experiences. And then they're going home and they're being told, no, esa es cosa de negros. No, esa es cosa de ellos. Esa es cosa de ellos. Ellos son los negros. And I'm not crying for me. I'm crying for us. Because we need to figure this out. This stuff is serious. People are getting killed. Marielle Franco got killed in Brazil because of this. Sonia Pierre died in Santo Domingo because of this. There are women that have been killed. My friend Francia Marquez right now, Vice President of Colombia, and every interview she does, she's still having to defend who she is, even as a vice president. We need to do better. Black is not a bad thing. And somewhere or the other, this community has fallen for Black is bad and white is good. And we play it out on ourselves. And I just hope there comes why am I in this conversation for now almost 30 years and it feels like it just started yesterday? Why? Because we have not done justice to this conversation within the Latino community.
I really thank you so much for that. I know there's some wonderful questions in the chat, and I just want to give us actually a moment to actually just have a moment of pause and gratitude for our ancestors, those who well came before us, who have carried this conversation, and just a moment to think about how it feels like we are having the same conversation over and over again. It truly does. Yeah, I'm a big fan of taking those pauses. Some of the questions, we have an amazing group that has been here with us. I want to actually speak to some of that because I believe that you all gave us a lot of these answers. What Yvette just talked about. The work has to come from within first. Aura talked about that. From within our families, that is where it starts. So having the courage, the audacity, the ability to stay strong in who you are and your identity. Rosa talked about, books that really get us to understanding who we are and what brought us to the situation, who we are as a people, but who we are politically, like how we've been couched into this environment and into this situation, and how white supremacy and anti-Blackness has actually been coded into the politics of the countries that we come from. You look at the Dominican Republic, Rafael Trujillo, right? Once I learned that, it completely opened my eyes to understand Black denial, like why people would say that. But these are some of the answers. We can embrace our identity, but understanding that this is a purpose for us. Like if you're just here to, I want to speak to this issue, I want to, shine a light on something, that's a very different walk than understanding that this is what you're meant to do. So I really want to amplify that in the question about how do we embrace our identity and how do we deal with an organization. Alejandrina talked about camaraderie, allyship, getting her colleagues to do that virtual walkout with her. That's truth to power. That's how you're shifting dynamics within the organization. Being able to organize within our movements and within our groups is truly important. So understanding the principles of a Malcolm X grassroots movement, right? There are people right here who have organizations, Encuentro Diaspora, which is Yvette's organization you can get involved with, also La Red de las Mujeres Afro as well. Afro-Resistance is another incredible organization. Genevieve Comrie, our other Panamanian sister, who has this great organization. There are so many different places where people are doing the work, have been doing the work. And I really think every single person on this panel, we've been doing this work since we were born. Like we were literally born into it. Like our actual existence is resistance. So just knowing that you yourself are a walking miracle and you're doing the work. My parents raised me with the understanding that I might be the only person that somebody encounters who has my background and experience, and I carry that responsibility from my ancestors to do that. Now, there was also a beautiful question about how do we take care of ourselves? Ooh, how do we take care of ourselves? So we've had I know Yvette and Rosa talked very candidly about that. I know Alejandrina, you talked about your struggles and being, put into these boxes and how you needed to take care of yourself, quitting your job. I'm a big fan of quitting, y'all. We don't have to stay in toxic environments. So I deeply resonate, Rosa, when you talked about divesting from white supremacy. For me personally, a lot of my peace has come from that. So the 2016 election, I was like, I'm divesting from whiteness completely. That was all the explanation I needed. I was like, okay. I was like, 53% of white women voted for Trump. That tells me that you will vote for white supremacy despite your own interest, your own best self-interest. You will do that. So that was my key personally. But I do, there's so much in terms of, we keep acting like all of these things are new, like, oh, meditation and oh, herbs. And like, My abuela was an herbalist. She would have never have called herself that, right? So for me, I can say, I think is a returning to who we are that actually is like our ancestors knew how to care for themselves. They lived through the worst atrocities this world has ever seen, ever, and they survived it. So it's a lot of going back to that. You know, who are we? I take time for myself, I can tell you, and please others share to meditate. I meditate every day.
But
It's
I think the Aisha, the meditation is good, but also part of the conversation around our racism and our denial is going back to what our ancestors did, going back to what those enslaved Africans in Española, which was Haiti and Santo Domingo, did to beat the colonizers. And that's our spiritual practices, I'm an ex-athlete, so that's still part of my life. But my spiritual practice has also grounded me in a different way. But even within that, that's been negatized. We will embrace the practice, still saying within the Latino community, we may embrace the practice, but we still have anti-Blackness even within that. But we're embracing our African spirituality. So it's like, my young people, they'll be like, yo no soy negro. Miss Yvette, usted va al bembé. Sí, Miss Yvette va al bembé y el bembé es africano. No, Miss Yvette, el bembé es puertorriqueño y dominicano. No, el bembé que tú vas es originalmente africano. So we don't even put it in that way. So, we would be practitioners, but we still don't give the credit that the practice comes from an African place. But I think, Rosa shared openly about getting sick. I, just shared. But our self-care is important. I come from love, so I always know how to lean back into it. I was bombarded with love in my upbringing, in my parents, and now as a father and a motherless child, they've still showed up with that love and spirit, and wanting to believe that. So I think self-care is important. Checking out is important. I don't need to be everywhere anymore. As I protect my energy, there's certain places that if I know that space is just not filled with people that have been supportive of me and to me, then I don't need to go. One of the things that you just have to learn that, and if you don't get invited, I remember before I used to get so offended when I used to not get invited. Now I'm like, no, I don't need to be there because there's a reason you didn't invite me. Because there's something about me that you are not wanting to deal with. And I'm not lying. So there's a truth that you don't want to deal with. Because
I still get kind of tight though. I'm not even, I'm going to be, I still be like very passively aggressive, very aggressive, be like, really? You're not going to invite me or Yvette, Marta Morena Vega, John Viet, Lloyd Limbal. I'm like, y'all are whack. Why am I not there? But just to say one thing about the self-care, I don't like the term self-care itself because I think it's been very corporatized. Mm-hmm. But if we look back on our African and indigenous practices, we know as anything, like we've done that work. One of the really dope privileges of me living back up in, quote, upstate New York is their Soul Fire Farm. One of the dopest Black-led farms in the country, 30 minutes away from me. Those are my comrades, my people. My daughter's been there. We've been there as much as possible. Then I have Liberation Farm, 45 minutes away from me by a dope comrade of mine, Omawale Adewale, who's been talking about veganism for 20 years. Yes. So I think what we're seeing at our age, the 40 maybe plus, but 50 plus, is the fruit of the labors. And we can see this best being practiced in real time in Puerto Rico. When Hurricane Maria hit, it changed the consciousness of older Puerto Ricans who were like, we can never be free. We need the United States. Donald Trump took paper towels. The next day, the entire consciousness of a nation shifted. So 5 years later with Fiona, no matter how jacked up Luma is, and we know that, a mutual aid infrastructure was in place, which is why we have not seen thousands of deaths like Maria. One death is too many, but the number of deaths post Fiona, Maria, that's the work. For 5 years, Boricuas from the diaspora in the island, international communities have rallied around building a mutual aid infrastructure in Puerto Rico. So we don't need to be begging white folks. What we're doing in Puerto Rico right now is trying to run out the gentrifiers and the cryptocurrency. And for younger people watching this, go to the Twitter debate yesterday with this cryptocurrency white supremacist Paul Logan, who then tried to come at Bad Bunny, and I'm all with Jamila's critique of Bad Bunny. But I'm like, dude, you picked the wrong one. He bodied him by showing in Puerto Rico, we could be the first island in the world that runs on renewable energy sources.
Yes.
Be free, and decolonization has never looked as bright as now. That's just an example. And that to me is my self-care, my movement care, my comrades. And lastly, having a group of people that'll be like, you're dead wrong. You need to take a break. You've been working too hard. You need to focus on your husband a little bit. You need to, deal with that. And one of the things of dealing with it, as Alda has spoken to, but look, I had to cut mad people in my family out. It became too mentally unhealthy for me to continue to go to event after event after event for a decade, 15 years, and be like, don't say that. How the F did you vote for Donald Trump? Abuelo is rolling in his grave right now. How are you, my cousin, rocking a Confederate flag? And I had to tell my mom and dad, I love them, but I will not bring myself around them. And I'm certainly not bringing my Black husband and my Black Puerto Rican daughter, because it made me so mentally unstable. I went into years of depression of trying to fit into my family when a lot of them is just who they are and it's who I am. And I bounced. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't.
I want to, build up in what you said, Rosa, because I struggle with that myself, with my own mother, and as feminist as she is, but as racist as she is, in this internalized racism world. But one thing and I'm speaking of my own experience, people are going to tell you you're not good enough in different subtle and aggressive ways. You're not tall enough. Your curly hair is not curly enough. Oh, it's too straight. It's not this. It's not that. You're too light. You're too dark. You're this. You're that. You're too loud. You're too much, all that. And you have to rest reassured. There's have to be something that you have to find deep in you, that that what you're doing is what whoever God, the universe, whatever it is that you believe, send you to this world to do. And that's what you got to hold on to, that thing inside of you, and that community that Rosa also mentioned, and Yvette, and the people around you. I went to those 10-day silent retreats, guys, and I went way deep. Deep that I saw myself even as a child with traumas of like babyhood, that things that are hard for me to explain here. But again, find a practice and rest reassured that what you're doing is what you're supposed to be doing. And people are going to tell you no, and people are going to tell you you're wrong, and people are going to tell you just want attention, and you blah, blah, blah. And you just got to keep going, because this is what you're here, this is what you're here to do.
I want to give Alejandrina some space. Do you have any pearls of wisdom for us as well? So we're wrapping up, unfortunately. We should have had a panel just on this.
Want to say that I feel very lucky to be in this space and resonate with so many different pieces of what everyone has said and everyone that's tuning in, listening, and all the experiences that you all have had as well. Like knowing that we're like threaded together and I've right now I'm at my burnout stage, so I'm listening to this and I'm like, wow, it's okay, there's the other side is there soon, it's very soon, and I'm getting there very soon. But I just want to say that mutual aid, it's right there, community is right there, we have each other. And yeah, if you have time to read some books like Dr. Clemente has mentioned, another one would be Disability Visibility by Alice Wong, and that kind of dives into some different stories of disabled people across the nation, and seeing how different disabled people experience life. But I'm happy, I'm full of love. This is amazing, all love to everybody here, so thank you.
Yes. Thank you all so much. It has been such a joy to be in conversation and be in community with you. I'm glad to add two other comadres to my community. Thank you all so much. We definitely do need a conference just like this. So let's make that happen. And I'm just grateful to have people who are simultaneously holding me and holding me accountable. So that is the work. So thank you all. Yes, have a wonderful rest of your day, the conference, etc. And hasta luego.
There she is. Hola, querida.
I am so like filled up right now, y'all.
Yes.
Don't care. And yeah, you my sister. You've been with me in these trenches.
Sure.
When I always used to claim the Black roots before it was cute to do so, right?
Yeah.
So many spaces being Dominican, as light skinned as I am, I always said I was the blackest one of them all because this self hate, particularly in the Dominican Republic, is one of those things that we need to really lean into and hold people accountable to how they show up. And I think that this conversation here today, and I'm so glad this was the best way for us to end because this is really the beginning, right? In terms of when we look at what the work that needs to be done as we continue to dismantle white supremacist ideologies. And so you guys brought it to us. And I just want to say thank you for bringing your full selves into this space because oftentimes it's the elephant in the room that no one talks about. We talk about all being Latinos, but not all Latinos are treated equally, even within our own spaces and spaces. I wanted to say thank you for being so vulnerable, for bringing your full selves into the space, and for keeping it 100, right? Because the work is heavy. And I always say that this is not hard work, y'all. This is heart work, right? The work that we do is with our hearts. And so thank you for giving so much of yourselves here today with us. I'm like, all of y'all. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So we're going to be moving on